go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Andy Posner. I'm the founder and CEO of Capital Good Fund. I'll tell you a little bit about our work. But first, just want to welcome you to what is called the Get Housing Right Conference. It's presented by the University of Rhode Island Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies, and it's got support from Homes RI. We have a really exciting panel for you. It's called New Models for Community Wealth Building. And we're going to be talking about, we have three great presenters going to be talking about research into new and creative mechanisms to expand community ownership, an interesting proposal for a shared equity rental housing model, and a model for community-driven investment in BIPOC small businesses. Before I introduce myself and the speakers, just some points of order. So we'll have speakers present for about 15 minutes. Please type your questions as we're going along, although we're going to hold the Q&A session at the end, which will last about 25 minutes. The session is being recorded, just as an FYI, and we'll definitely monitor the chat so we can answer your questions as we go along and at the end. So just a little bit about myself and my organization. We are based in Providence, Rhode Island, but operate in 9 states. We're a nonprofit community development financial institution, or CDFI, doing small dollar personal loans for a variety of purposes, including things related to housing. So rent or utilities, security deposits, all the way up to solar and energy efficiency loans for low to moderate income families. And one of the things that we try to deal with is predatory lending, which affects a lot of underserved communities, whether they're renters or homeowners, and often can lead to eviction, bankruptcy, and a whole host of issues that are very related to the topic at hand. For example, right now in Rhode Island, we're trying to get a bill passed that will eliminate payday lending in the state. The average interest rate on a payday loan here is 260%. And of course, it's an issue across the country. Other states where we operate in, Texas, for example, allows a 500% APR on payday loans. So really excited to moderate. I know some of the folks in the room, I see it, and some of the panelists. And so I will now pass it off to our first speaker, who is Brett Theodos, who's a senior fellow at the Urban Institute. Brett, take it away.
Thanks so much, Andy. Good to be connected to everybody. Good to get a chance to chat about what is, I think, a really exciting development in our landscape. And I'm been privileged to be able to play a documentation role to be able to help shed some light on what it is and how it's emerging, these new models for community wealth building. I'm not the one doing the work. You're going to get to hear from some people who are doing the work a little bit later, which is, I think, really exciting things. So I'm a fly on the wall getting to observe it, but happy to share some reflections. So I will share my screen here and confirming that everyone can see that. Awesome. We will get underway. So I wanted to start with a reflection on need, and this is not news to anybody, I'm sure, but just can help sometimes to put it into context. So we have wealth and income. We have equity gaps that exist certainly by race. In the US, if families were to be ranked by their wealth, the bottom 50% would have 1% of the nation's wealth, while the top 10% of folks would have 77% of the nation's wealth. We can see, for example, if we look by race, ethnicity, that white families have 7 times the wealth of Black families and 5 times the wealth of Latino families. So there are needs, there are wealth, there are income and equity grabs. We also know that housing costs are rising higher than incomes. That's true on the ownership purchase side. That's true on the rental side. We know that in some markets, not everywhere, but in some markets, there are displacement pressures. There are relatively limited opportunities for shared ownership in the US. Either you own the thing and the full thing, or you don't, is often the model that exists. There is limited philanthropic and public sector support in this space in this way. Now that I've depressed you, what are some ways that we can begin to think through new and emerging models? And that's what's exciting, is there really is innovation work bubbling out there. So we, together with colleagues here at Urban, I've created a way of categorizing some of these new, exciting, emerging community wealth building, community shareholder models. And I put them into 4 categories, and I'll walk through them now. I'm gonna give a couple of examples and some lessons that are beginning to emerge, and then that'll be it. Okay, so the first we're calling neighborhood crowdfunding models. These go by some different names. Could be a neighborhood REIT or a community investment trust or others. But in short, these are where members of a community have fractional ownership. They have a small stake in some income producing business or property. Next category we've talked about is occupant equity. And not just residential, but also commercial. And so in these models, community groups pool their resources together or source funding from philanthropic and the public sector to buy real estate, remove it from a speculative market, provide long-term affordable housing or business space. The next group of activities we've called local institutional equity. So this is actually somewhat different than the resident-centric or even the small business owner-centric model. This is where a local institution could be supported in having a greater equity stake in a business or in a nonprofit that's working locally, generating revenues for that community-based organization. And the last is what we've called a neighborhood nonprofit trust or endowment. And this is a nonprofit that partners with community residents and establishes a perpetual pool of capital from which local grants can be made, for example. Okay, so I know that you want to know some of the examples. So here are some of the crowdfunding examples. So this is the first category that we've talked about. Rocket Creek was in San Diego. This is one of the oldest, if not the oldest example of this, where people could buy in and own a commercial development, shopping market, and some retail for $200. Exit was undefined. It was a one-time buy-in, and it was geo-conditioned. You had to live within some designated zip codes around Market Creek, and this is the Jacobs Foundation that helped originate this. A more contemporary example, Nico in Los Angeles. This is a B Corp. You can invest for $100 at the minimum and own some residential real estate, multifamily real estate. So local investors aren't actually given any preferential pricing, but they have more flexible terms. A different model, Northeast Investment Cooperative. So this is a co-op, but not the kind of co-op where you need to live in the co-op or work in the co-op. This is like a purchasing, owning co-op. So they've bought real estate locally, commercial real estate, retail, office, and you can buy into the co-op and have a share. You can own a share of the property. And another is this community investment trust, Plaza 122 in Portland, where you can buy in for as low as $10 a month from designated zip codes in a high immigrant community. And we're going to hear about a Boston example as well. I will say more about that. So some things that are emerging in terms of promising design features that we have seen are low purchase price, people being able to buy in for low levels. If we're trying to build wealth for people of very modest means, $10 a month, maybe what can be provided, even $100 a month, that could be prohibitive. Allowing for easy exits, not tying people up for 20 years in a commercial real estate project, but allowing them to be able to exit if they have need of the investment. And just as a reminder, these are investments. This is not Philanthropy may help make some of these transactions happen, but these really are investments in the financial sense. Having ongoing buy-in options can help, because if some people get familiar with it, they can tell their neighbors, versus if everybody has to sign up on the first date, it really raises the bar in terms of education campaigns, and there's some trust barriers to overcome. Strong community engagement and decision-making in the design processes are important and have varied across these models. It's important that they be profitable, right? If we're trying to build wealth, then we need the project to actually work out. And the Market Creek example revealed some of the challenges there, because some things that the community might want, like a fresh foods grocery store. Well, that grocery store required some below market rate rents, or what the project thought were below rate rents, to be willing to locate there. That ate into the profitability. So the social goal of getting this grocery store was actually in some ways at odds with the profitability goal of the project from the owners. So we need to be clear that not every project can do all things, and we need to make sometimes tough decisions or consider the tensions or the trade-offs between some of the goals that we're looking for. And then, of course, secure in the financial sense. Okay, so the second category is occupant equity. I'm not going to spend much time on this because I have a feeling that many of you will be familiar with these models. So these models are creating and preserving long-term affordable housing and commercial spaces for community use, like community land trusts, cooperatives. A lot has been written about those. I can say more in the Q&A if you have questions. A lot of my work has focused in this area. But I wanted to stress that these are not mutually exclusive categories, these four groupings that we talked about, and a single project could have elements of more than one. So the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative has both an occupant equity dimension and a neighborhood crowdfunding dimension. So don't think of these as either ors. It could well be that a project can do more than one of these, again, considering the trade-offs. Okay, the third category that we have been looking at and this one I think has received the least attention, is local institutional equity. So in this model, community ownership and institutional wealth expands when community-oriented institutions invest in the neighborhoods where they operate. And again, with a profit motive in mind. So a CBO takes an equity stake in some local real estate or in a business to generate long-term future revenue stream for that CBO, supporting its core mission work. So two examples that I've written up as case studies. One is in Chicago, Pritzker Traubert Foundation's work with the always growing Auburn Gresham project, Auburn Gresham, a neighborhood in Chicago. And that project, the philanthropy supported a CDC, Community Development Corporation, to actually be able to make a for-profit investment in an anaerobic digester, which takes like food waste and converts it into green energy. So there's a social mission to the business, but it's a for-profit business. And through the philanthropic investment, the CDC will be able to get revenue as the digester is profitable. And so the local investment will be supporting further local investment as the profits from the business flow to the CDC and flow to neighborhood redevelopment in the community. Another example is Whitman Walker. This is a health clinic in Washington, D.C. They were sitting on a piece of prime real estate in Northwest D.C. along 14th Street as the property values went through the roof. But their property was not faring well. It was old and it was requiring lots of costs of maintenance. And so they faced a choice of sell for $25 million, perhaps the land, somebody would demolish the building and build something really splashy, or hang on and keep investing a lot of money into this building that's falling down. Those seemed like the only two options. Well, they were able to come up with a third option, which was that they entered into a joint venture partnership with a developer, created that splashy building, but now they are a majority equity partner in this joint venture. And so that joint venture is going to be throwing off in a couple of years now. The project has been built and is stabilized, and is doing quite well from a rental perspective. And they maintained an office there, so they're actually a tenant as well as an owner, so they could keep serving the community. But it's going to be throwing off $2-3 million a year in revenue. So rather than one-time sale, they become an equity share. They're able to remain in the neighborhood and yet also profit from the real estate that was built around them. Some takeaways of these kinds of projects. Oh, I may have missed a slide. Oh, no. Okay, I missed the slide on the community equity model. Let's see if I can track that down while I'm talking. But the basic thrust of those, the community equity models, the mint type models, is that they would allow you to become an owner in some form and thereby be able to share in that piece of the equity as the neighborhood itself begins to appreciate. And those subsidies can be recycled. So a model that we've written up in DC, community equity endowments, that's being considered right now for a property in DC, it would actually allow the neighborhood to have a bit of an ownership stake in this commercial real estate deal, and that would support a small neighborhood endowment that would make small grants. And another example is Trust Neighborhoods in Kansas City and working in Tulsa. They're mixed income neighborhood trusts that own rental properties and thereby are trying to prevent displacement, but they're also endeavoring to have folks be able to support this perpetual fund as these things revolve and achieve profitability. Another example that we've described is the Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia. So those are some of the biggest types of models that are emerging. There are a few takeaways that we want to highlight. First, projects that shift ownership and wealth from, developers and buildings to community members, there can be a lot of forms, and they're exciting to see those that are emerging. At the same time, a project can work in many ways simultaneously. We've seen across these models that philanthropy can support innovative community investment while also helping us move towards standardization. Right now, we have a lot of flowers blooming, and that's exciting to be in that developmental stage. It also means we're not exactly replicating the same thing. The Guild in Atlanta is another example of one that's come on the scene. And so as this field grows and it matures, and as it gets less expensive to do this each time, we're going to move more towards some standardization of products, of offerings, of financing, of the infrastructure needed to educate consumers. There's financial education components of many of these programs, of the software and applications and technology to take deposits, especially those that may come in, $10 a month sort of thing over time, and be able to return that. Breaking the investment mold to center on community building, wealth building is not easy. I'm sure you can ask questions about that. And also, last thing to stress is that local government and to some extent state and federal government can do a lot to advance these community wealth building models. What if, just by way of example or illustration, what if a city required as part of its zoning variance process, community benefits agreement, allow residents to buy equity in the building that's being built, just by way of example. All right, I'm at my time. Here are some links to the publications that describe better than I did everything we were just talking about. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brett. And it's really great because you provide a framework